Hello class, welcome to our lecture on Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been by Joyce Carol Oates. I'm just going to try to go through the discussion questions that I've put up for your study guide. Some of these I'll answer in a little bit more detail than others, and some of these you can find answers to through your own readings. The first one, and you can follow along if you have this open, or the study guide discussion questions open. The first one asks why Joyce Carol Oates dedicates this particular story to Bob Dylan. And what song is she using? The song that she's using is It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. And if you look up the lyrics, you'll actually see some of the lyrics to that song are actually quoted in the story, more specifically, the vagabond who's rapping at your door. If you watched the video from Joyce Carol Oates, the interview that I posted on Blackboard, you'll see that she says that she dedicated it to Bob Dylan more because of just his overall kind of sound and content that was more kind of fantasy and fairy tale ish. And she wrote this story as kind of a cautionary tale of sorts. And she was listening and she just felt like, hey, this is very similar to what I'm writing about. And it just had that kind of fit. And that's the main reason she dedicated to him. Moving on to number 2, the question reads, to identify the repeated references to rock music and how they contribute to our understanding of the story and youth depicted in the story. Again, all stories are ambiguous. There's multiple interpretations. So I'm just going to share what this means for me. I remember as a young teen watching, romance movies on TV, listening to songs about love, about partying, all of these kind of issues that I had no personal experience with. And so I was drawing my sense of reality from things that I saw in entertainment. Even as a young child, reading things like Cinderella and Snow White and Sleeping Beauty. Um, all of these kind of representations of life through entertainment are not realistic. They're very romanticized. The problem with that is when we're young, we are so susceptible to what we read and watch on TV and hear through music. And when we don't have any kind of real life situations to compare that romanticized fantasy with, we're misled to believe that life may be different than it really is. This is definitely present in Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been? And the repeated rock music is really kind of a wink at or an allusion to pop culture in the 60s, and these huge generational gaps that are present. This is one of the 2 of the research questions I asked you to look for. We're shifting during this time period from the role of a woman being a nurturer and stay at home wife and mother to women actually getting out and working. This is a huge generational difference. And alongside that, we also have our younger generation, listening to music that the older generation saw as being flat out evil. Um, it seems comical to us now because we live in a different time period. But Elvis, the way he would dance and move his hips, I mean, that was just considered so inappropriate and devilish and Satan's music, to the point where there were actually, like, I don't want to call them riots, but standing out and trying to sway people to not listen to this kind of music because it was so horrible. We need to understand this connection with what question 2 is asking, with seeing how the newer generation, these young teens, were using rock music as an escape of sorts, but also that it was tarnishing or blinding them to what the reality of the world was. Um, and I think that that's very similar and timeless because, like I said, I wasn't born in the 60s, but I can definitely relate to that kind of reality is not what's depicted in our social media now. It's not what, the Kardashians' lives are not like ours. Um, Everything is so far removed from what real life is like. And growing up kind of looks presents those differences to us. The older we get, the more we start to realize that how different our entertainment is from reality. Very similar. I kind of answered number three along with that, with the teenage culture. It, I do want to say and add here, though, that Connie is only 15 years old. That's very young. Um, and I'm going to stereotype here just a little bit, but it's not uncommon for teens to kind of have an "I'm invincible" type attitude. It doesn't mean that I'm not trying to say that teenagers are ignorant and oblivious to things that could go wrong. I think teens, especially today, are. It's just I think we still have in even today's society teens thinking, yes, I know this can go wrong, but it's not going to happen to me. Those types of things happen to somebody else. And that teenage culture um, of Connie's world in the 60s was definitely very ignorant and innocent. Um, you know, Growing up, I would never even open a door to a stranger, much less stand in the doorway and speak to one the way Connie does. Because I grew up in a time period where we were called latchkey kids, constantly told of the dangers. Understand that in Connie's teenage culture, those conversations weren't happening. It was a different time. And we need to understand that to understand the story and how and why it is a cautionary tale. For Arnold Friend, number four, discussing his character. Again, good old ambiguous interpretations. Scholars view Arnold Friend in different ways. If I had you look up literary criticisms, you might find some that look at the importance of his actual name. If you take out the R's, for example, his name is an old fiend, and it's mentioned that when he walks, it's almost like he has hooves. So when we use those types of support, those scholars are trying to portray or interpret Arnold Friend's character as representing the devil or evil. Um, my personal interpretation, I have a little bit more of a logical or kind of cut and dry interpretation of his character. Another research question I asked for you to look up was who Charles Schmidt was, the Pied Piper of Tucson. And the reason I did that is I see, and other scholars as well, see a lot of connections between Arnold Friend and Charles Schmidt. I encourage you to actually look up pictures of him. And when you look at the pictures of him, you can even see where he would use makeup to put a fake beauty mark on his face. And he would use like drama putty kind of on his nose to make his nose look different. He would stuff his shoes to make him look taller because he was a shorter man. And if you look at all of those character or physical traits of Charles Schmidt, they also tie into our physical traits of Arnold Friend, who tries to make himself appear to be someone he's not. He tries to make himself appear to be younger than what he actually is. He speaks in kind of a musical, lilting voice so that he can capture or fit into this persona that a young person would find attractive during this time. Um, he Joyce Carol Oates also says that part of the reason that she wrote this cautionary tale is she was reading an article, a news article about Charles Smith, the Pied Piper of Tucson, and how he had raped and murdered these teenage girls. And she wasn't really taken back so much by his horrendous deeds, because they are horrendous, and she acknowledges that. But what was shocking to her was that there were these teenagers who were accomplices in that. They remained silent. They knew of these murders. They knew of these rapes. They knew that Charles Smith had buried these bodies. They knew where the bodies were buried, but they said nothing. And that was shocking to our author. She couldn't understand what would make a normal teenager not come forward with that kind of information. And that's when she kind of started to write this story. So again, there's different ways of interpreting his character. I kind of answered number 5 with my previous response about why he's talking in that simple lilting voice. Connie, same thing. When you analyze Connie, you could do something similar with her name. She is the con-e, the person being conned. Another way that we could look at her is she represents innocence or the vulnerability of youth. From a female's perspective, I also see her as a young woman kind of exploring her sexuality. She's attractive. She knows she's attractive, and she celebrates or appreciates the attention that her attractiveness provides to her. Hold on to that thought, because one of the questions I'm going to go over here in a minute with dealing with feminist concerns are going to go back to our views of beauty and how we respond to our perceptions of beauty. Ellie or Eli Oscar, number 7, on what he represents. Similar to Arnold Friend, his appearance kind of fits into that stereotype of what pop culture found attractive. In addition to just kind of this lecture and the Charles Smith images, if you'll just kind of Google images of like Bob Dylan, Elvis, and kind of look at their pictures from the 60s, you're going to see that they looked a lot like these characters, Arnold Friend and Eli or Eli Oscar, with their sideburns and the way their hair is styled. So they're kind of using their appearance to lure people to them. What's most relevant to me about Ellie or Eli is that he, even though he doesn't seem to be involved with taking Connie or threatening Connie, he is aware of what's going on, and he does nothing. He also always has sunglasses on, so it's like he's blind to the reality of what's happening, and he always has that radio up to his ear, so he's deaf to the reality of what's going on. Also, interestingly, like he's always plugged in, kind of. Interestingly, the children are the teens from the story I just told you about, the real life story about Charles Smith, when they were aware of the murders and they were sitting in the car actually when these murders occurred, the rapes and murders. They were listening to the radio while it happened. So for me, this is another kind of tie-in to real life events that happened. In those real life events, perhaps Eli is representing those normal, everyday teenagers that did nothing about the murders committed by Charles Smith. The next one I would kind of like to look at, because it is ambiguous. What is the significance of the title? First, Arnold Friend tells Connie, the place where you came from ain't there anymore. and where you had in mind to go is canceled out. That kind of is a play on where you going, where have you been, and it also infers that something bad is going to happen to Connie. Now, we don't get an actual ending to the story as, black and white what happens to Connie, but we can definitely tell that she's not coming back home. Um, I infer that he's probably she's going to be buried somewhere and killed, but that's not directly given to us in the ending. It is inferred. Um, I also see with the ending, now that I'm a parent, uh, those are kind of questions that a parent asks. Like if someone goes out, if their child or their teen goes out, where are you going? Or if they come home late, where have you been? Um, and either way, sadly, these are questions that Connie will never be asked again because she's gone. And that kind of, when you think of it that way, that kind of gives me chills, like that kind of ominous kind of feeling. I want to focus some time on questions 11 and questions 12. I know that this video is getting long, but I want to make sure we go over as much as possible, so I want you to do well on your quiz. Greg Johnson wrote a book entitled Understanding Joyce Carol Oates. And in that critical text, he argues that this story has explicit feminine concerns. Discuss what these concerns could be. Um, the feminist concern that I see most here is similar. I'm going to try to compare this to like everyday situations. Connie is targeted um, because she's beautiful and because she is out and about and um, advertising or celebrating the fact that she's attractive. She likes to look in mirrors, she flips her hair, she's always primping. Um, and this is kind of going back and forth between 11 and 12, but physical beauty um, in society, and I would say even today, is on one hand, it's celebrated, but on the other hand, there's a lot of jealousy and anger that goes along with that. A feminist concern here is why should there be consequences for an attractive female? I'm going to compare this to our modern or society's views now on rape, which is another violent crime, just like the crime similar to the crime that's committed in the story. Um, we say things, and by we, I don't mean myself or you necessarily, but society as a whole. We say things about women who were raped. We'll make comments of, well, the way she was dressed. I mean, she was kind of asking for it. Um, and we really have to stop and kind of think, like, really, did she leave the house thinking, oh, yay, I want to go get raped? Like, was she really asking for it? Um, or she was intoxicated. What did she expect to happen? Like, there's somehow an excuse for this crime to take place. And that's very concerning about the way we view things as a society. And that's similar to the feminist concern that is being addressed by Greg Johnson, in that um, if Connie weren't attractive, or if she didn't advertise that she was attractive so much, then this would have never happened to her, as if she was somehow asking for it. And again, we consider that a feminist concern because there's nothing wrong with celebrating being a woman or being attractive or anything like that. And it's kind of a society's view of physical beauty. Society wants to see someone who, we don't want someone to be ugly because then we say stuff about them, but we don't want someone to be beautiful either because then we say things about them. It's almost like someone has to be just average for society to be okay with them. Um, Most of what we focus on in physical beauty, all of our advertisements, all of our money, everything is kind of spent and put into shaping ourselves into what society's view of physical beauty is. Someone like Connie, on the other hand, who flaunts her attractiveness, is considered promiscuous or deserving of something bad, or seen negatively by society. You can see this demonstrated in the story with Connie's mother. Uh, some students even will say sometimes, like, "What's up with Connie's mom? Is she like jealous of her or something?" And the simple answer is, yeah, I think so. She definitely has this female view that a woman should not be too attractive or flaunt her attractiveness. Instead, she should be more along the lines of what Connie's mother is. To her, that's what an acceptable woman would be. I'm running, I know this video is running really late, so I'm just going to finish off on the parallels between Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been, and Little Red Riding Hood. Both are cautionary tales. Both show the negative consequences of straying from what a blossoming woman should do. And if someone follows off that path, you know, if Connie flaunts her attractiveness and doesn't do what she's supposed to do, well, then bad things can happen. If Little Red Riding Hood doesn't go straight to her grandma's house, if she veers off the path, bad things happen. Understand, of course, you know, both of these beautiful women would be the victims, and both are dealing with the big bad wolf, so to speak. But both of the victimized women are paying penalty or consequences for exploring their curiosity and exploring their own sexualities. Again, back to those kind of feminist concerns. I hope this video helps you. Don't use this as just your one-stop answer thing. I wanted to discuss some of this so that you can generate some of your own ideas, brainstorm. Remember, there's never one simple answer to any question asked of literature. There's always multiple interpretations. And as long as you can support your interpretation with the text, you're right, whether it's the same views as me or if they're different. Have a great day.